Howdy folks, this is Tom Barbley here. Every time I come to record this stuff there's always a problem. It's typically the audio levels, so apologies in advance if the audio levels are a bit wrong. I wanted to show some stuff that I'm working on currently with Noble Ape. I thought the easiest way to do it would be to probably run this version of the simulation. I don't know whether this is the threading version or the non-threaded version. I think it's probably the non-threaded version. We'll find out very quickly as we run it. Yeah, this is a known bug that the two windows don't come up together. You gotta love that overshadowing that it does. Anyway, so the first part was just to talk a little bit about the OpenGL version of the simulation. It should not be doing that. What on earth is going on? Maybe it was just a general graphics overview. Anyway, so this is the standard, as it comes in the box version of the Noble Ape simulation, running in the GUI mode. Obviously the command line provides a lot more information. The thing that interests me about this is actually just the raw speed. You can kind of see it moving around. And nips over. So there's a lot of underlying mathematics, but it's done relatively quickly. Although it is taking a inordinately long time to actually do a full day. But you see things like tides, and you see the other apes running around, you've got the cognitive simulation, you've got various overview items, energy, speed, all that kind of good stuff. So let's wait for it just to conclude, or at least go to sleep. So we're getting to night time. You have the colour variations as well, which I really like. And here we go. Here's dusk and night time. Cloudy night. Okay, so that's that version. I've got to appreciate the time that it took to actually start up. Now we have the OpenGL version. Is turned on just by doing this. This is for the Mac version only. Implementing initially for the Mac version. Okay, so this doesn't have any of the coloration, but it's the... Okay. So this is running exactly the same simulation. Well, it's not exactly the same simulation. But the first thing that you notice is that it's actually moving a lot slower. It just moved, I think because of tides, but the tides aren't actually updating on this version. So you can already get a sense that the simulation isn't running as fast for the OpenGL version. There's a good reason for that, I'll show you in the code in a minute. But let's at least get it moving. Or alternatively, let's just drop it in the water so you get a sense of the movement. So this is computing a vast number of polygons, and that's actually the problem. To get it roughly the same level of quality, I think that would be comparable quality in terms of the resolution of polygons, you actually need to do a lot more computation, and the methods that have been previously described in Ape Realities associated with like doing preloaded landscapes and these kind of things, I've considered. In fact, I think that's probably the easiest option here. But again, it requires a vast amount of memory, and it probably requires some tessellation, but some division of the various landscape components and putting them all back together and probably rejoining them along sections. I have an algorithm which I'm going to implement that also does selective culling. I think that would be, well, not even selective culling, basically it looks for similar or identical gradients and just provides the same, well, the fewer polygons over the similar gradients or identical gradients, which basically simplifies the landscape a little bit. Simplifies the landscape by about a third, so you might see a third's bit improvement. But little things like this stuff, I'm just not really a big fan of. So this is the first problem that I'm looking at. I want to get out of this version. I'm a huge fan of the OpenGL. Let me, for folks who are interested, who are actually OpenGL enthusiasts. So this is the problem currently. it's just a map update. And I think there's more optimization that can be done, but it's just basically creating a physical map and a color map associated with that. So that's problem number one. Let me turn this off. Yep, cool. Okay, so come back to the Subversion version. The second thing that I'm looking at, and this comes in parallel with the threading discussion, I probably should run. Sorry, this is the first thing in the morning. Yeah, a version of the threaded simulation as well to get a sense of the current speed associated with that. Why don't I do that? I think this is the function of the recording software. This is just really, really bad. Look at that. So this is the threaded version of the simulation. You get roughly double speed. I probably should have noted that. But yeah, so you get quite a bit of interesting stuff. The main concern that I have is the one-to-one mapping, which is basically you take a non-threaded version of the simulation, you take a threaded version of the simulation, and they provide the same output. That's pretty critical because, well, as I'll talk about, you need that. So the next step, I think, is to establish a network version of the simulation. And here what I'm looking to do, I'm going to put my mouse here for, a descriptive reason. The underlying landscape and weather simulation, all these kind of things, can remain constantly updating on just basically time ticks, because the underlying randomization, all these components are they're sequential in time, irrespective of how random it appears. Basically, you give it a seed, it continues on, that's fine. So my view is that if you were to have a number of computers running Notable Ape, the way that you would distribute it is based on the apes being distributed. And the main weakness to that is there's a lot of ape-ape communication, which changes both apes. So, for example, you've got gestures, you've got a wide variety of actions, and you also have language communication, where basically the apes need to know what's going on quite intimately with the other apes' internal, what have you, simulation components. The thought that I had was that the apes that are within physical proximity to one another should be on the same computer. The test here is to see how far an ape will move in a given period of time, or whether they actually maintain some degree of territorialness, which I think is probably the case. But it's an interesting process. I mean, you can see that's, 2 days worth, and the ape has not really moved, but there are established pathways through the simulation environment. And you will see apes that do wander across the pathways. What I was thinking originally of doing was actually creating different kinds of dots and starting off each ape based on what quarter they are in a simulation area. Having a kind of different dot shape, and then running it over a period of time to see how the dots had actually progressed, and if there was some kind of net migration or these kind of things, or if there were established tribes. Now, as you see here, there are quite interesting kind of tribal groups. You have the one which is probably from where the mouse is currently. I don't really want to move the mouse because it's indicating how far this ape is travelling. And as you can see, within 4 or 5 days, it's basically traversed more than half the map. So let's describe the groups. So I see this as kind of being one group, maybe these guys up here are another group, and then you've got a kind of another group of stragglers. So over 3 computers, that's the way it would be represented. But I think what's more important here, and this feeds back into the whole threaded model, is to minimise in terms of number and maximise in terms of productive information the kind of ape-ape communication that's going on. And that is quite an interesting process. What I'm thinking almost is of not necessarily a kind of delta communication, but almost like a bulletin board communication of important information that can be transferred per time cycle to each noble ape from each other noble ape that's needed. Obviously, the option will be to not communicate as priority, but then if they have to make communication, the communication will be prioritized accordingly. And this information can be transferred between machines and thus allow the simulation to run. I'm yet to do a proper surveying of the kinds of ape-ape communication that's going on, but I think that in and of itself would be quite interesting. There's something to optimize. I have gone through particularly what's now in the body code associated with social action, and done some early optimization with that, or at least some early unification, just bringing the stuff together. But I think there are a number of interesting points here associated with creating a version of the simulation which is considerably more scalable across the network, with the view that if you had 15, 20, 100 machines connected, then you could do very interesting things. The other thing that I've been thinking about, which is relatively easy in this version of the simulation, is having the land areas almost like tiles, where you have a computer simulating each tiled area, and for every new computer you add a new tile to the environment, potentially creating single chains, or in the case of 2s or 3s or what have you, building accordingly. And the landscape is very scalable in that fashion as well, and that way you can simulate a certain number of apes in your particular tile. In fact, there are a number of different ways to cut computational, shared computer simulations of noble ape over networks. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well, just to explore some different kinds of problems to date. With regards to threading, Gillian, who comes from the eastern part of the US, the northeast, has added a simple threading model. There are a few problems associated with it currently, particularly interacting with the graphics and also maintaining the one-to-one nature of threaded and non-threaded simulation. But I think it's all doable, and certainly as you're seeing here, I mean, you're watching it run currently. It provides a number of interesting insights into the simulation considerably faster. There's still some issue associated with the interface with the command line version, which is another important facet of the simulation. NA long-term really has become almost a kind of de facto way to run the simulation if you want to get particular interesting results, or you want to interrogate things in a different way. And I think it's amazing interface, and hats off to Bob Mottram for all his work and that effort. I think integrating it with the GUI version, I have an initial version, but it requires a better threading model, will also, provide very interesting results, enable you to see and track the physical locations of the apes. It provides an amazing interface, actually, into the simulation. Anyway, I probably should stop rambling. Tom Barbalet in the Bay Area, signing out.